Hello again, and welcome to a video on the construction and fitting of removable wagon loads. I'm using some old Hornby MSV wagons, but the principles will be the same for any open wagon. The loads will be stone ballast to represent that quarried in Somerset. I will also cover my method of inserting and removing the loads without having to remove the wagons from the track. To finish, the wagons will be painted and weathered to improve their appearance and hopefully make them look a little less toy-like. And yes, I do know these wagons bear only a passing resemblance to any prototype, especially in the chassis area, but I like them. I like to run both empty and loaded trains, so fixed loads are not an option. Removable loads have been around for ages, but my take on them may be a little different. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be able to insert and remove the loads whilst the wagons were still on the layout. The solution I came up with was this extending stick, which has a magnet on the end. Also, therefore, I needed something metallic for the magnet to attach to, and found these small washers in my garage. The first step was to make the false floors. I used 1.5mm plastic sheet with the supports made from the same or similar material. The floors should be a snug fit in the wagon with only a small gap around the edges to allow easy insertion and removal. The washers were glued to the tops of the false floors using superglue and shouldn't be seen once the ballast is glued in place. The basic floor was fitted into a wagon to check for size. Although the gap at the left-hand end looks a little large, in reality it hardly notices and should disappear further once painted and the stone ballast is glued on. The tops of the floors have now been painted in a similar colour to the ballast, so that if any of the latter should come unstuck or be knocked off whilst on the layout, it shouldn't show up too much. First magnet test. The magnet is lowered gently down onto the washer on the false floor to see if it attracts and can lift the floor. It does, and takes only a small effort to remove it. Encouraged by that success, the next stage is to glue on the ballast. The ballast was obtained at a local model railway exhibition from Atwood Aggregates. The colour, I was assured, is a good match to that quarried at Foster Yeoman's Merehead Quarry in Somerset. The stone ballast has now been glued to the tops of the false floors and covers the washers nicely. The slightly domed shape looks just right, just as it would having been loaded from above. Second magnet test. OK, so now the moment of truth. Has the magnet enough strength to lift the load now the ballast has been glued in? Despite positioning the extending stick in various places, the ballasted floor is not lifted by the magnet. Was the ballast too thick, or the washer not big enough? The project may have come to a premature halt, so it was time for a rethink. I decided to try fitting some shortened clout nails instead of the washers, as the heads would give a bigger area for the magnet to latch onto. I also thought I would keep the layer of ballast on top of the nail as thin as possible. The next step was to test and see whether the magnet would convincingly lift the floor with the clout nail glued in place before attaching any ballast. This was successful, and the magnet attached very firmly to the head of the clout nail. In fact, it was quite difficult to remove. So far, so good. Ballast was glued onto the false floors, but this time only very thinly over the nail heads. Next test. Would the magnet lift the floor with the ballast glued on? It would appear that it would, and so the project is probably now back on track. However, for the project to be a complete success, the magnet must be strong enough to load and unload the wagons, and do this without upsetting them or removing them from the track. This was first tested on my desk. Turning to the wagons themselves, the wheels were removed to make painting them easier. I do like my wheels to be the same colour as the underframes of all my stock, and I certainly don't like the white wall tyres that Hornby chose to put on some of these wagons. So they were given a quick coat of my usual underframe grime colour. The chassis, buffer beams and couplings were all given a coat of the same colour as the wheels to dull them down a bit and remove the black shiny finish of the standard Hornby wagon. I do like the underframes of all my stock to look as if they've been in service for a while and not come straight from the wagon repair shop. I'm funny like that. The exteriors of the wagons are a bauxite colour, so I started by painting the interiors a similar colour. I'm not quite sure why I did this, but I didn't like the appearance and didn't take any video of this stage. The second attempt was to paint the interiors with a colour that matched the tops of the false floors. This was much better, but I didn't take any video of this stage either. The interior sides and ends were then dry brushed with vertical strokes to give the effect of stone ballast being loaded from above and scraping or scratching the sides of the wagons. This was done twice, the first time with a darker version of the base colour and the second time with a lighter version. I think by now the interiors were looking a little worn and dirty and as if they had been loaded quite a few times. The wagon exteriors were treated to some general scruffing up by painting and dry brushing a dark brown colour to simulate rust. Lighter, more orange tones were added later to represent more recent rust patches, although these don't show up too well against the bauxite colour of the wagons. The wagons are old, and when I bought them were showing their age. Some of the axle boxes were splayed outwards, with the result that the wheels tended to drop out. The couplings were not all at the same height, which made coupling rather difficult, and as I said earlier, the models are not very accurate. The wagons all carry the same running numbers, but I can live with that, and in any case, The weathering has hopefully made that a little less obvious. But these are all things I can fix. One of the great pleasures of railway modelling for me is to improve and breathe new life into what are perhaps not much better than toys. And these models are cheap. They averaged out at about £6 per wagon. I've enjoyed myself greatly on this project, and when compared to the originals, I think the finished results look good. These wagons should run on my layout for a long time yet. So now it's time to give the same treatment to some Lima PGA hopper wagons. But until then, that's all for now, so see you next time.